Let's see how she gets back, Julian chuckled, his voice a sharp, ugly sound in the soft Italian twilight as he slammed the car door shut. The red taillights of our rental car bled into the distance, shrinking until they were just pinpricks of light that vanished around the curve of a cobblestone lane. All that was left was a cloud of dust settling in the still air and the faint, cruel echo of his friend's laughter. I was left standing there, frozen on the spot, my mouth slightly agape from the sentence I hadn't finished. The heated argument we'd been having just moments before, outside that tiny, charming cafe, was suddenly erased, made utterly meaningless by this single, unthinkable act. "He'll be back," I murmured to the empty street, my whisper earning a few curious glances from the locals who were enjoying their evening meals at sidewalk tables. This is just a sick joke to frighten me. But the knot of ice in my stomach tightened, pulling colder and harder as the minutes bled into a full hour, and the sky bruised from orange to a deep, starless indigo over a town whose name I couldn't even properly pronounce. Before we go any further, I just want to pause and say thank you to every single one of you for being here and listening. If you find yourself connecting with stories about women discovering their own power in the most unexpected ways after a betrayal, I'd love for you to consider subscribing. It costs nothing at all, and it's a huge help in supporting the creation of more stories about resilience and finding a new beginning. All right, let's get back to it and see how an act of profound cruelty became the first step toward one woman's liberation. When I had pleaded with Julian not to drink so much wine at lunch, I never could have imagined it would spiral into this. His friends, a boisterous crew from his college days, celebrating their annual guys' reunion that I had been invited to, or rather tolerated on, had been relentlessly goading him on when I suggested we should probably head back to our hotel. "She's always trying to control you, man," Leo had slurred, waving the waiter over for another bottle. When I finally stood my ground and decided to leave on my own, Julian had stormed out after me, his words thick with alcohol, but his anger perfectly, chillingly clear. The argument devolved quickly, years of unspoken resentments and frustrations boiling over and spilling onto the quiet street from both of us. "Your purse has your passport, doesn't it?" He'd sneered, a cruel glint in his eye just before he climbed into the driver's seat. "Then you'll figure it out." You're so smart, after all, always telling everyone what to do. Night fell completely, and the reality of my situation sank in like a stone. The beautiful Italian town, which had seemed so postcard perfect in the daylight, now felt alien and menacing. Its narrow alleyways were dark mouths, its shuttered windows like closed eyes. I opened my small clutch and counted my cash. 90 euros and about 50 American dollars. It wasn't nearly enough for a flight back to Chicago, and barely enough to secure a room for the night. My credit cards were tucked safely inside Julian's wallet. He'd offered to hold them for me earlier in the day, a seemingly helpful gesture when my tiny purse was too full. I found the cheapest pensione I could, a grim, dusty room situated above a bakery. It held a narrow, lumpy bed and a stained sink in the corner. The elderly woman who led me to the room spoke not a word of English, but she seemed to grasp the essence of my predicament, patting my arm with a look of deep sympathy. "He blocked me," I whispered to the peeling paint on the wall, staring at my phone in utter disbelief. I had called Julian 27 times. Each call went directly to his voicemail. My frantic text messages showed the delivered status, but they remained unanswered. My heart pounding, I tried calling Leo, then Ben, then every single one of Julian's friends who had been crammed into that car. Every one of them had blocked my number. A cold shudder, violent and deep, ran through me as the truth settled in. This wasn't a spontaneous, drunken impulse. This was a planned, coordinated act of humiliation. Sleep was a fractured, restless thing, punctuated by the false hope of checking my silent phone and then being plunged back into a fresh wave of panic. By morning, I had managed to convince myself that this whole nightmare had to end. Julian would show up, a sheepish apology on his lips, though he'd undoubtedly find a way to blame me for overreacting to his harmless joke. I would be furious, but the relief would be so overwhelming that I'd let it go. We'd go back to our meticulously constructed life in Chicago, where he was a rising star in the architectural world, and I was his polished, supportive wife who had quietly shelved her own interior design career to become the unpaid manager of our home and their social calendar. But he didn't come. The day passed in a slow, agonizing crawl. On the second day, I rationed what was left of my money, buying just a single panini for lunch as I walked the entire perimeter of the town, my eyes scanning every hotel, every cafe, every restaurant for any sign of our tour group. By that evening, a crushing realization hit me. They had simply moved on. They had continued their trip as planned, heading off to Florence without a backward glance. On the third day, a kind-hearted cafe owner who had noticed me loitering outside his shop for hours took pity on me. He brought out a free espresso and, in heavily accented, broken English, gave me directions to the local police station, the Carabinieri. The officer on duty seemed completely unfazed by my story, as if abandoned tourists were a depressingly common occurrence. But his very limited English and my non-existent Italian resulted in a conversation that went nowhere. I left with nothing more than a filed report I couldn't read and a sympathetic, useless nod. That afternoon, I made the single hardest decision of my life. Standing in front of a cramped, dusty pawn shop window, I twisted my wedding ring off my finger. It was the 3-carat solitaire diamond Julian had given me on our 5th anniversary, an upgrade from the simple, modest band we'd started with. The shopkeeper, a man with weary eyes, offered me a fraction of its actual worth, but it was enough. It was enough to fund the next step of whatever this terrifying new journey was. America. Call family, the pawnbroker suggested in rough English as he counted out a stack of euro notes. I nodded mechanically, my mind a million miles away because a different plan was already taking root inside me. Calling family meant explanations. It meant hearing my mother's sad, knowing sigh and her inevitable, "I told you so," about Julian's temper. It meant facing the pitying looks of friends who had seen the hairline cracks in our marriage that I had worked so desperately to plaster over. The bus station was nearly deserted when I arrived, its large electronic board displaying a list of destinations I'd only ever read about in travel magazines. An overnight bus to Rome, with connections to ferries, to other buses, to places where Julian and his friends would never think to look for me, if they ever even bothered to try. My thumb hovered over my father's name in my phone's contacts. One call. That's all it would take. He would wire the money for a flight home in a heartbeat. One phone call and I could return to the life I had so carefully built, a life where I had systematically made myself smaller and smaller to make room for Julian's ever-expanding ego and his endless demands. A memory surfaced with startling clarity. It was from a few years ago when I'd excitedly mentioned the idea of getting back into interior design work, maybe starting with small projects. Julian had laughed, and later that day he'd playfully hidden my old portfolios. "Why complicate things?" he'd asked, pulling me into a hug. "We don't need the money, and I need you focused on our life, on us." I'd laughed it off at the time, flattered by his supposed need for me. But sitting in that grimy, desolate bus station, I saw the moment for exactly what it was. Another bar in the gilded cage he had so lovingly constructed around me. "Where you go?" the ticket agent asked. She was an older woman with kind, tired eyes who had been watching me stare blankly at the departure board for what must have been 20 minutes. "Greece," I answered, the word crystallizing into a solid decision the moment I spoke it aloud. "The furthest coastal village you can get me to." 14 hours later, I stumbled off the final bus of my journey, my entire body stiff and aching from the cramped, uncomfortable seats and the relentless tension. The air that greeted me was a revelation, thick with the scent of salt and sun-baked olive groves. I took in the sight of the whitewashed buildings of a village whose name was as unpronounceable as the one I'd left behind. My phone's battery had died somewhere between countries. My stomach was a hollow, aching void, and the sheer weight of what I had done, or what had been done to me, pressed down on my shoulders. Exhaustion was so profound that the edges of my vision had begun to blur as I wandered aimlessly toward what looked like the town center. 3 solid days of emotional whiplash had left me utterly raw, my mind cycling endlessly between white-hot rage at Julian, a paralyzing fear of my uncertain future, and a strange, unexpected flicker of something that felt dangerously close to liberation. My remaining euros would maybe cover 2 nights in the cheapest room I could possibly find. After that, I had no plan. I had no friends, no contacts, no grasp of the local language beyond a rudimentary please and thank you. But as I stood there watching the sunset paint the Aegean waters in strokes of gold and rose, a profound calmness settled over me, a peace I hadn't felt in years. Julian had intended to teach me a lesson about dependence, to show me how much I needed him. Instead, by a stroke of cruel irony, he had accidentally set me free. The Greek sun beat down without mercy as I found myself wandering further and further from the village. My feet were already blistering inside the impractical, fashionable sandals that were meant for sightseeing, not for hiking on dusty, unpaved roads. My water bottle had been empty for hours, and the potent combination of dehydration, hunger, and pure emotional exhaustion made the world around me tilt and swim. Silver-green trees lined the path, their leaves shimmering like 1,000 tiny coins in the gentle breeze. Olive groves, I realized dimly, just a moment before my knees gave out from under me. The ground rushed up to meet my face, but I barely felt the impact. Darkness encroached on the edges of my vision as a strange, peaceful resignation washed over me. Perhaps this was a fitting end. Abandoned by my husband in one foreign country, only to collapse and die alone in another. I closed my eyes, finally surrendering to the bone-deep exhaustion that had been building since the moment Julian drove away. Theos mu Kyria. A woman's voice, sharp with alarm, cut through the hazy fog in my mind. A moment later, I felt weathered, strong hands gently turning me over. An elderly face swam into my focus. It was a face etched with deep lines around kind, wide eyes that were filled with concern. She spoke rapidly in Greek, her voice a soothing murmur as she patted my cheeks and held a canteen to my lips. The water was cool and life-giving, reviving me just enough to sit up, though my head still spun violently. She introduced herself as Sophia, repeating her name while pointing to her chest. I weakly mimicked her gesture. Clara. Sophia helped me to my feet, her small, wiry frame surprisingly strong as she supported most of my weight. She pointed up the hill toward a simple stone farmhouse nestled among the olive trees, and then made a walking motion with her fingers. I nodded, lacking the energy or the will to resist as she guided me slowly up the dusty path. The farmhouse kitchen welcomed me with the fragrant scent of herbs hanging from wooden beams and something savory bubbling away on an ancient-looking stove. Sophia settled me into a chair at a worn wooden table before calling out to someone in the other room. A man's deep voice responded, and a few moments later, an elderly gentleman with a sun-darkened face and a thick silver mustache appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Antonis," Sophia said, pointing to him. Her husband. He nodded at me, his eyes cautious and questioning, but not unwelcoming. Sophia poured cool water into a glass and pressed it into my hands, which were trembling. This was followed by a bowl of simple, hearty soup. My stomach growled so loudly at the aroma that it made Sophia smile. That evening passed in a surreal blur of broken communication. I tried my best to explain my situation through a clumsy combination of the few words we shared. elaborate hand gestures, and eventually, just helpless tears. Sophia simply nodded as if she understood everything, even though I knew she couldn't possibly grasp the full, sordid details. Antonis remained mostly silent, but attentive, occasionally asking his wife a question that she would then attempt to translate for me through more gestures. They offered me their spare room, a simple, clean space with whitewashed walls and a narrow bed, covered by a beautiful handmade quilt. I was too exhausted to protest. I collapsed into the bed and fell into the most profound sleep of my life. Morning arrived with the sound of roosters crowing and the intoxicating aroma of fresh bread baking. I found a set of clean clothes neatly folded at the foot of my bed, a simple cotton dress and a cardigan that looked decades old, but were freshly laundered and smelled of sunshine. They hung loosely on my frame, but they were a welcome change from my travel-worn, grimy outfit. In the kitchen, Sophia beamed when she saw me, immediately pouring me a cup of strong, dark coffee and serving me a thick slice of fresh bread drizzled with olive oil and honey. With the clarity of daylight, a wave of embarrassment washed over me. These complete strangers had taken me in without a single question, fed me, and even clothed me. I had to explain myself, offer to pay them for their kindness, and then figure out how to move on. Using a combination of my broken English and the translation app on my phone, which was now charged thanks to an ancient adapter Antonis had managed to produce, I tried to convey my immense gratitude and my intention to return to the village. Sophia's face immediately fell. She shook her head vigorously, pointing outside where a soft rain had begun to patter against the windows, and then pointed down at my still blistered feet. "Stay," she insisted, using one of the few English words she knew: rest. Over the next 3 days, I made several attempts to leave, but each one was met with the same gentle, stubborn resistance. Once I had my purse in hand and my shoes on my feet, ready to walk out the door, but Sophia intercepted me, her expression so genuinely wounded that a fresh wave of guilt washed over me. She took my hand and led me over to a small wooden box on the mantelpiece. She opened it to reveal a collection of faded photographs. Her fingers, gnarled from years of work, trembled slightly as she pointed to a picture of a young woman with Sophia's eyes and Antonis's smile. "Daphne," she said softly. Then she pointed far away as if gesturing across the globe. "Australia." Her eyes filled with tears as she made a cradling motion with her arms, then held her hand at waist height to indicate a small child. "Grandbaby," she managed in English, pointing to a more recent photo of an infant. "No see." I understood then. In her grief and loneliness, Sophia saw in me a surrogate for her absent daughter, a temporary presence to fill the vast, hollow space that Daphne's departure had left behind. But instead of feeling manipulated or trapped, my heart ached with empathy for her loss. I nodded slowly, turned around, and hung my purse back on the hook by the door. Each day brought new, simple routines as I gradually became a part of their farm life. Sophia showed me how to gather eggs from the chickens without startling them, how to hang laundry so the mountain breeze would catch it just right, making it smell of sun and fresh air. Antonis taught me to identify the different weeds among the rows of vegetables in their garden, his patience seemingly endless as I mistakenly pulled up a precious herb on my first try. The work was intensely physical, a world away from my carefully curated life in Chicago. It was nothing like the designer gyms and measured, sterile exercise routines I was used to. My body, soft and unaccustomed to real labor, protested loudly at first. New calluses formed on my hands, and muscles I didn't even know I possessed ached every single evening. But with each passing day, the pain lessened and my strength grew. More importantly, the constant obsessive mental loop of replaying my abandonment began to quiet, replaced by the simpler, more immediate concerns of farm tasks and learning a new language. At night, sitting on the small porch while Sophia knitted and Antonis smoked his pipe, I found myself experiencing genuine moments of peace. The betrayal still cut deep, a raw wound that would take a long time to heal. But here, surrounded by ancient olive trees and the gentle, steady rhythm of rural life, it began to feel less like the end of my story and more like an unexpected and not entirely unwelcome new chapter. 2 weeks after my arrival, Sophia sat beside me on the porch as we shelled a mountain of peas from the garden. She studied my face for a long moment, her expression thoughtful, before asking slowly in her improving English, "Home? You want go home?" She made a little airplane motion with her hand and then pointed vaguely west, toward America. The question hit me with an unexpected force. Home. The word conjured an image of our sleek Chicago brownstone with its designer furniture and meticulously coordinated color schemes. But it also brought Julian's controlling behavior into sharp, painful focus. His helpful management of our finances that left me without any independent access to our money, his subtle, systematic discouragement of my friendships, his dismissive, condescending attitude toward my own career aspirations. Tears I didn't know were there spilled down my cheeks as words poured out of me, a torrent of English that Sophia couldn't fully understand, but whose emotional weight transcended any language barrier. I told her about Julian's betrayal, about the years of slowly, piece by piece, surrendering parts of myself just to keep the peace, about the searing humiliation of being abandoned like a piece of unwanted baggage in a foreign country. Sophia's weathered hand covered mine as I spoke, a silent, comforting anchor. When I finally finished, my voice raw, she pointed to her heart, then to the farm around us, and finally, to me. The message was perfectly clear. I had a place here, if I wanted it. "Work," I said, my voice careful and deliberate, mimicking the motion of Antonis tending the olive trees. "I stay. I work." Sophia's smile bloomed like the sunrise over the Aegean. She nodded, squeezing my hand tightly before turning her attention back to the peas, as if we had just agreed on something as simple as tomorrow's menu, rather than the complete and total redirection of my life. My decision to stay marked the true beginning of my education in the art of olive farming. The very next morning, Sophia shook me awake while the stars were still faint dots in the sky. She handed me a set of work clothes and sturdy boots that had once belonged to her daughter, Daphne. Half asleep, I followed her and Antonis out to the grove, where the first hint of dawn was just beginning to illuminate the gnarled, ancient trees. "Elise," Sophia said, gesturing to the fruit-laden branches. She showed me the proper technique, gently combing the branches with long wooden rakes to release the olives onto the large nets we had spread out below. My first clumsy attempt sent a shower of twigs and leaves cascading down, along with a precious few olives, earning me a patient correction from Antonis. By mid-morning, with the sun blazing overhead, my shoulders burned with an unfamiliar exertion, and my city-soft hands had already developed their first angry blisters. "Chicago lady hands," Sophia teased gently, examining my palms during our lunch break. She disappeared into the house and returned with a small pot of homemade salve that smelled of herbs and beeswax. The cooling relief was immediate as she carefully spread it across my raw skin. "Tomorrow, better," she promised, and to my surprise, she was right. Each day brought a little more improvement. My technique became more refined, my strength steadily built, and my hands began to toughen. Within a couple of weeks, I could work alongside them for hours without complaint, taking a quiet pride in the growing piles of harvested fruit. The sorting process proved to be even more demanding than the harvest itself. We would sit at a long wooden table under the shade of a pergola, meticulously separating the olives by quality. The perfect, unblemished ones were destined for the premium oil, the slightly blemished ones for a second grade, and the damaged ones were set aside for soap making. Sophia watched me with hawk-like eyes at first, correcting my mistakes with gentle nudges and quiet explanations. Gradually, her corrections became less and less frequent as my eye developed for the subtle distinctions in color and texture. "You learn fast," Antonis commented one evening. his own broken English improving alongside my rudimentary Greek. It was the highest compliment he had ever paid me, and a warmth spread through my chest at his simple approval. My education extended beyond the groves and into Sophia's kitchen, a place that had initially intimidated me with its complete lack of modern conveniences. Back in Chicago, I'd considered myself a decent cook, perfectly capable of following complex recipes from gourmet magazines for the elaborate dinner parties that were meant to impress Julian's colleagues. But Sophia's cooking was a different art form altogether. It involved no measuring cups or precise temperatures, just generations of knowledge passed down through hands and observation. "Watch," she would say, kneading dough for bread with practiced, fluid motions. I'd try to mimic her movements, failing spectacularly at first. My initial loaves emerged from the outdoor stone oven misshapen and either doughy in the middle or burnt to a crisp on the outside. "Practice," Sophia would encourage, breaking apart even my worst attempts to taste them. "All learning is waste." Her casual acceptance of imperfection was revolutionary to me. In my previous life, mistakes had been something to be hidden and ashamed of, not seen as necessary stepping stones to mastery. The simplicity of their meals revealed just how processed and artificial my American diet had been. Here, almost everything came from their own land or from neighboring farms. Vegetables were still warm from the sun, eggs had been collected that very morning, and the cheese came from the goats down the road. The flavors were so vibrant and clean that they needed little enhancement beyond a drizzle of their own olive oil, a squeeze of lemon, and a handful of herbs from Sophia's garden. My body began to change on this new diet and work regimen. The designer clothes I had arrived in, which I now kept packed away in a suitcase, grew loose as unnecessary weight melted away, replaced by lean muscle. My complexion, which I had once maintained through a cabinet full of expensive creams and serums, began to glow from nothing more than simple olive oil soap and honest sweat. When I caught sight of myself in the small, cracked mirror above the bathroom sink, a stranger looked back at me, tanned, stronger, and somehow more substantial, despite weighing less. As my Greek vocabulary expanded, Sophia and I found more ways to communicate that went beyond labor and food. During our evening breaks on the porch, she would bring out her old photo albums, pointing to black and white images of her youth in the village. I was startled to discover that she had once been a school teacher before she returned to her family's olive business after getting married. "You?" she asked one evening, mimicking typing on a keyboard. I took out my phone and, for the first time in months, scrolled through the photos to find images of my interior design projects from before I married Julian, the career he had so casually dismissed as a hobby. Sophia studied them with genuine interest, pointing to specific elements she liked and making appreciative sounds. "Beautiful thinking," she said, tapping her temple. Her simple, unprompted validation of my creative work brought tears to my eyes. It was such a small acknowledgement, yet it was something Julian had gradually withdrawn as our marriage had progressed. One rainy afternoon, Sophia taught me how to knit, her patience seemingly infinite as I repeatedly dropped stitches and created uneven, lumpy rows. My first completed project was a simple scarf, imperfect in every way, but it was made entirely by my own hands. I wrapped it around my neck with more pride than I had ever felt wearing the designer cashmere scarf Julian had given me for Christmas. Other handmade possessions soon followed: a clay mug I formed under Antonis's patient guidance, a woven basket I learned to make from a neighbor. Each item represented hours of learning and connection, carrying stories and memories that no purchased luxury ever could. My little collection of these meaningful objects grew as my attachment to material perfection diminished. After 3 months of working without any compensation beyond room and board, Sophia approached me one morning with Antonis at her side. They led me to the small building where they pressed and bottled their olive oil, showing me the modest inventory they had produced from our collective harvest. "Market day," Sophia announced, pointing to the calendar. "You come." The village market was a vibrant hub of activity. Farmers and artisans displayed their goods, while locals and the occasional tourist browsed among the stalls. Sophia and Antonis set up their simple table, arranging bottles of their golden green oil alongside jars of olive soap and preserved olives. To my complete surprise, they positioned me at the front of the table, encouraging me to be the one to speak with customers. My broken Greek and their limited English created moments of confusion and a lot of laughter, but sales steadily accumulated throughout the day. As the market was closing, Sophia handed me an envelope containing a small wad of euros. "Your part," she said simply. "Fair work, fair pay." I stared down at the modest sum. It was perhaps enough for a single meal at one of the upscale restaurants Julian and I used to frequent. Yet this money represented something I hadn't possessed in years: independence earned through my own labor. There were no strings attached, no subtle expectations of gratitude or compliance. It was just fair compensation for honest work. That night, I placed the envelope under my pillow, and I found myself reaching down to touch it several times, as if to confirm that it was real. In our decade of marriage, Julian had gradually taken complete control of our finances to simplify things, as he put it, leaving me with credit cards linked to accounts that he monitored. This small stack of euro notes represented the first solid step toward rebuilding a life that belonged entirely to me. As I drifted off to sleep, I realized I hadn't thought about Julian at all during the entire market day. My mind had been too occupied with trying to remember Greek phrases for transactions and feeling a deep sense of pride in our products. The space he had once occupied in my thoughts had shrunk, replaced by the scent of olive groves, the memory of kitchen lessons, and the growing certainty that I was capable of far more than he had ever allowed me to believe. The following week, Sophia and Antonis invited me to join them for dinner at the taverna in the village square, a first since my arrival. Dressed in a borrowed blouse from Sophia, I felt a nervous flutter as we entered the bustling, noisy establishment. The owner, Yanis, greeted the couple with enthusiastic embraces before turning his curious eyes to me. "Our American," Sophia said proudly in Greek, a phrase I was now beginning to recognize. Yanis smiled warmly, ushering us to what was clearly their regular table. Over plates of grilled fish and carafes of village wine, Antonis cleared his throat and spoke in careful, deliberate English. "Clara, we want talk business with you." His seriousness caught me completely off guard. Had I made some terrible mistake? Was this their gentle way of telling me it was time for me to move on? Sophia must have seen the panic in my eyes, because she reached across the table and patted my hand reassuringly before continuing where her husband left off. "We old now, 68, 70 years, she said, pointing between herself and Antonis. "Daphne not coming back." Antonis nodded solemnly. "We think retire soon, 2-3 years. But olive trees." He made a sweeping gesture that encompassed the hills around them. 200 years old, need young hands. My breath caught in my throat as I began to understand where this was going. Sophia smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "You learn fast, work hard, we teach everything." Then, she spread her hands wide as if offering me the entire world. "Business yours." The proposition left me stunned. They barely knew me. I was a foreigner who had literally stumbled into their lives just a few months ago. Yet here they were, offering me a future I hadn't even dared to imagine for myself. "But I don't know enough," I stammered. "The trees, the pressing, the business side of it all." "You learn," Antonis said firmly, his voice leaving no room for argument. "We teach, no rush." That night marked the beginning of my true apprenticeship. I was no longer just an extra pair of hands. I was now the designated heir to generations of accumulated knowledge. Each morning, Antonis would take me through different sections of their groves, explaining how variations in the soil affected the flavor profiles of the olives, how to identify the early signs of disease, and when precisely to harvest each section for optimal oil quality. Sophia focused on teaching me their business records, which were a combination of handwritten ledgers and a basic computer spreadsheet their grandson had set up for them during a holiday visit years ago. Her method of tracking expenses and income was functional, but outdated. Seeing an opportunity to contribute in a way that went beyond physical labor, I spent my evenings updating their systems, creating digital records that made tracking inventory and sales much simpler. "Look," I showed Sophia one night, demonstrating how she could now filter the spreadsheet to show which varieties of oil sold best at which markets. Her eyes widened as clear patterns emerged from the jumble of numbers. "Smart," she nodded approvingly. "Chicago lady brain, good for business." With their blessing, I started to implement small marketing improvements. Our hand-labeled bottles received updated tags that included information about flavor profiles and food pairings, knowledge I had gleaned from my countless cooking lessons with Sophia. I created a simple, elegant brochure about their traditional, time-honored methods, which answered many of the questions that tourists frequently asked at our market stand. My improving Greek helped me to forge connections that went beyond Sophia and Antonis's immediate circle. The local pharmacist who provided Sophia's blood pressure medication began stopping by our market stall for conversations that extended beyond simple transactions. The baker's wife invited me to join her weekly coffee gathering with other village women, an intimidating but invaluable immersion into the local language and customs. Yanis, the owner of the taverna, became an unexpected ally when he began featuring our premium oil as a table offering, placing small carafes with our new labels prominently on each table. "Good for you, good for me," he explained with a wink when I thanked him. Word of mouth began to spread, and soon 2 other restaurants in neighboring towns contacted us about supplying their establishments. 6 months into my new life, I attended the baptism of the butcher's granddaughter, my first formal village celebration. Standing in the back of the small, incense-filled church, I watched the ancient community ritual with a lump in my throat. The elderly priest noticed my presence and made a point of greeting me afterward, switching to a halting English he had learned during his seminary days in Athens. "You bring new life to Old Grove," he said, his rheumy eyes twinkling. "Good for village. Young people leave for Athens, for America. Village needs new blood." His acceptance seemed to remove the last invisible barrier. After that, invitations flowed more freely to name day celebrations, impromptu gatherings at the beach, and even a village committee meeting about the upcoming summer festival. Each event wove another strand into the intricate web of connection that was holding me firmly in place. Irina, the weaver whose stall stood next to ours at the weekly market, became a particular friend. In her 40s and widowed young, she possessed a sharp wit and a pragmatic outlook that reminded me of my old college roommate. Our conversations, conducted in my improving Greek and her excellent English, ranged from business strategies to village gossip to more personal reflections. "You never speak of America," she observed one quiet afternoon as we were packing up our unsold goods. "Family there." "Friends?" The question pierced me unexpectedly. I had become so intensely focused on building my new life that I had actively pushed thoughts of my old one aside. "My parents died years ago," I said. "A few friends, but—" I trailed off, realizing just how successfully Julian had isolated me from my support network, always finding reasons why my college friends were problematic or my work colleagues were using me. Irina nodded knowingly. "The husband. The one who left you in Italy. You never say his name." "Julian," I said, the syllables feeling foreign and strange on my tongue after months of silence. "His name is Julian, and he never searched for me." Her directness was refreshing after months of Sophia and Antonis's gentle avoidance of the topic. "I don't know," I admitted. "I haven't checked." My phone... I gestured vaguely. I had powered it on occasionally to take photos, but I had completely abandoned my American email and social media accounts, unwilling to confront whatever might be waiting for me there. Irina's raised eyebrow was a silent challenge. Perhaps it is time to look. Not for him. For you. To close the door properly. Her words stayed with me. That evening, after helping Sophia prepare dinner, I retreated to my room and powered up my old phone, connecting it to the farmhouse's basic Wi-Fi. With trembling fingers, I logged into my long-neglected email account. Hundreds of unread messages flooded the screen. Scanning the senders, I spotted several from old friends, their subject lines evolving from casual check-ins to increasingly concerned inquiries. A surge of shame washed over me. I had disappeared from their lives without a word of explanation, just as thoroughly as I had vanished from Julian's. A thread from my former design mentor caught my eye. The subject line was "Job Opportunity," followed by a series of increasingly urgent follow-ups. Opening it, I saw that she had recommended me for a remote consulting position with a sustainable building materials company. The final email, dated just 2 weeks earlier, indicated that the position was somehow still open, if I was interested. Before I could even begin to process this unexpected bridge back to my former life, another sender's name froze my fingers on the screen: Julian Davis. The subject line read, "I know where you are." The timestamp showed that it had arrived just a few hours earlier. My heart began to pound in my chest as I clicked it open. Clara. It's taken months and a private investigator, but I've finally tracked you to that backwater in Greece. This has gone on long enough. I'm coming to bring you home and end this ridiculous tantrum. My flight lands in Athens on Thursday. Be ready. 3 days from now. The room spun around me as panic and white-hot anger collided in my head. How dare he? How dare he, after abandoning me, after months of complete silence, expect to simply show up and collect me like a piece of misplaced luggage? I stumbled downstairs, the phone clutched in my hand like a venomous snake. Sophia looked up from the account ledger that was spread across the kitchen table, her warm smile fading as she registered the look on my face. "Bad news from America?" she asked gently. "Julian," I managed to choke out, "he's coming here. Thursday." Sophia's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. She reached under the ledger, pulled out a thick manila envelope, and slid it across the table toward me. Good timing, then. Was waiting for right moment. Inside, I found a stack of legal papers bearing my name alongside Sophia's and Antonis's. They were written in Greek, with official English translations attached. "Partnership agreement," Sophia explained. "1/3 business yours now, not future, now." Tears blurred my vision as I stared at the document, the full weight of its significance settling over me. This wasn't just employment or an apprenticeship. This was a legitimate, legal partnership. This wasn't just a place to stay, it was a foundation to build upon. This wasn't charity, it was earned recognition. "You choose what happens Thursday," Sophia said firmly, tapping the papers. "You have home here, business here, friends here." She pointed to the phone still clutched in my hand. "That man, he no longer decides." The truth of her words settled over me like a mantle of certainty. For the first time since being left on that Italian street, I felt not just like I was surviving, but like I was anchored. Julian was coming, but he was about to find a very, very different woman than the one he had left behind. The following days passed in a blur of preparation, but not the kind Julian would have expected. There was no packing of bags or tearful goodbyes, only a quiet, resolute, emotional fortification. I visited Eleni, the village's only lawyer who helped me draft divorce papers in both Greek and English. I contacted my old design mentor and tentatively accepted the remote consulting opportunity. I even wrote back to the friends I had left in the dark, offering brief explanations without making any apologies. Thursday arrived with a sky of perfect, cloudless Greek blue. I was in the processing shed, testing samples of olive oil with Antonis, when the unfamiliar sound of a rental car engine broke the afternoon quiet. Sophia appeared at the doorway, her expression a mixture of concern and resolve. "He is here," she said simply. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I calmly wiped my hands on my work apron and stepped out into the bright sunlight. Julian stood beside a sleek silver sedan, his designer sunglasses perched on his perfectly coiffed hair. He was examining the humble stone farmhouse with a look of visible distaste. He was dressed in the casual but expensive travel outfit I recognized from countless business trips, tailored chinos and a linen button-down that probably cost more than a week's profit from our olive oil. He didn't notice me at first, which gave me a few precious seconds to steady my breathing and anchor myself. This man, who had once been the absolute center of my universe, now looked somehow smaller, less substantial against the backdrop of ancient olive trees and weathered stone buildings that had become my home. "Julian," I called out, my voice surprisingly calm and even. He turned, and the raw shock that registered on his face was almost comical. His eyes traveled from my sturdy work boots up to my sun-browned arms, lingering on my unstyled hair, which was pulled back in a simple kerchief. I watched as recognition battled with sheer disbelief across his handsome features. "My God, Clara, what happened to you?" The familiar, disapproving tone, the one that once would have sent me scrambling to fix whatever flaw he had found, now merely washed over me like a wave against solid rock. "Life happened," I replied, taking a few measured steps toward him. "What are you doing here, Julian?" He removed his sunglasses, his practiced charm sliding back into place as he extended his arms for an embrace. "I've come to take you home, of course." "This has gone on long enough, don't you think? Whatever point you were trying to make—" "This isn't about making a point," I interrupted, stopping well outside of his reach. "This is about making a life." His smile faltered. Behind me, I heard the quiet shuffle of Sophia and Antonis emerging from the house. Though they couldn't understand our words, they positioned themselves within view, silent guardians ready to intervene if needed. Julian noticed them, and his expression hardened. "Are these the people you've been staying with? Have they been holding you here? Because if so—" "They've been teaching me," I cut in sharply, "about olive farming, about community, about kindness without conditions." I gestured toward the groves that surrounded us. "I'm a part owner now. I have a business here." Disbelief warred with the condescension I knew all too well. "A business? Clara, be serious. You're a designer, not a farmer. What is this? Some eat, pray, love phase you're going through after our fight?" "I admit, I shouldn't have left you in Italy. It was a stupid, drunken mistake. I've apologized. Now it's time to come home." "You've apologized?" I echoed, my voice flat. "When? In what universe does tracking me down and demanding I return count as an apology?" His jaw tightened, the charm completely evaporating. "Fine. I'm sorry I left you in Italy. It was immature and wrong. Is that what you want to hear? Can we move past this now? Why did you even look for me, Julian? It's been months. Why now?" He shifted uncomfortably, glancing over at the elderly couple who were watching us intently. "Can we discuss this privately? In the car, perhaps? They don't speak English, and I have nothing to hide from them." "Why now?" His shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. "Your parents have been calling. Friends are asking questions at events. Clients are wondering why you're not at the house when they visit. It looks—" He trailed off, unable to say the word. "Bad for your image," I finished for him. "It was damaging your reputation." "Our reputation," he corrected sharply. "Our life together. The one we built over 10 years of marriage." "The one you built," I countered, my voice gaining strength. "The one where I gradually became nothing more than a pretty accessory to your success. Tell me, Julian, did you even notice how unhappy I was before Italy? Did you care?" His expression darkened. "We had a good life, Clara. A beautiful home, financial security, respect in the community. What more could you possibly want?" purpose, connection, agency over my own choices. I gestured to the small stone house behind me. I found all three of those things here, in a place you'd dismiss as primitive and backward. "This isn't you," he insisted, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. "The Clara I know wouldn't choose manual labor and poverty over comfort and position." I smiled, a real, genuine smile, recognizing the fundamental truth in his statement. "You're right. The Clara you knew wouldn't have. But that woman died on a street in Italy when her husband abandoned her as a joke. The woman standing in front of you made different choices." Sophia approached then, pressing a folded document into my hand. It was the partnership agreement we had signed. Though she couldn't follow our words, she had sensed the moment had come. I unfolded the paper and held it out toward Julian. "I have legal ties here now, a business partnership, responsibilities to people who value me for my contributions, not for my appearance or my social connections." His face flushed a deep, angry red. "This is ridiculous." "Whatever game you're playing—" "It's not a game," I said, reaching into my apron pocket for the envelope Eleni had prepared. "These are divorce papers, Julian. Already filed, with provisions for the division of our assets." He stared at the envelope as if it might physically burn him. "You can't be serious. You'd throw away everything for this?" He gestured dismissively at the modest, beautiful farm. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing something better, something real." I stepped forward and placed the envelope into his rigid, unyielding hand. "You left me, Julian." You drove away laughing. "You just never expected that I would find my own way back without you." His fingers closed reflexively around the papers, his expression cycling through shock, rage, and finally, wounded pride. "You'll regret this," he said, but the threat sounded hollow, even to his own ears. "When the novelty wears off and you're still hauling olives in the hot sun at 60, you'll remember what you gave up." "Maybe," I conceded. "But I would rather risk regret from the choices I made for myself than live with the certainty of regret from the choices that were made for me." Antonis stepped forward then, placing a weathered, steadying hand on my shoulder. Though he hadn't understood our exchange, he recognized its conclusion in our body language. He said something in Greek to Julian, his tone firm but not unkind. "What did he say?" Julian asked, his voice smaller now, defeated. "He said the road back to Athens is dangerous after dark. You should leave now if you want to reach the city before nightfall." Julian looked from my face to Antonis's, to Sophia's, and finally registered that this wasn't a negotiation or a rescue. It was a goodbye. Without another word, he got back into his rental car, the divorce papers clutched in his hand. As the silver sedan disappeared down the dirt road, kicking up a cloud of dust, Sophia slipped her hand into mine. Together, the three of us turned and walked back toward the house. My house now, too. The evening's work awaited. There were oil samples to catalog, dinner to prepare, and inventory to check for tomorrow's market. My husband had once abandoned me in a foreign country, assuming I would be helpless without him, assuming I would come crawling back once I had learned my lesson. Instead, I had found fertile ground in which to plant new roots, stronger and deeper than he could ever have imagined. Sometimes, the cruelest actions yield the most unexpected gifts. In his attempt to break me, Julian had accidentally, beautifully, set me free. End of story.